So it's time to start again. I have now switched my hat to become session chairman. And of course, you're welcome to this session. I think it's the same people around. The session is integrating the gender dimension in research and innovation landscape. And what we will hear is how important European institutions have integrated the gender issue into their organizations in order to increase scientific performance. The focus is again on evidence-based best practice. The speakers are Professor Buitendijk from LERU, the League of European Research Universities. It's Professor Lago, sitting here, from the European Research Council Environment, and Dr. Borsch-Grevink, who is representing, I said, the European Union level. Unfortunately, the fourth speaker, Dr. Eickhoff from the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, she is unable to attend due to illness. This means that we have some more time for the presentations and the discussions. This also gives me an opportunity, and I was asked to give some information about what is happening on the European policy arena and the development of Science Europe. Science Europe is an umbrella organization for research funding and research performing organizations. For those who are aware of what happens on this policy level in Europe, you might have heard that there are two organizations, the European Science Foundation, I'm president of that one, and also there was an organization called Eurohawks, who was the head of all the research funding and performing organizations. I have actually been president for that one too, a couple of years ago. And instead of these two organizations, the organizations of the members, have decided to replace ESF and Eurohawks by Science Europe. That is a process that takes some time, so the European Science Foundation, which is quite active, as you noticed, by being an organizer of this one, will still be there for some years, but Science Europe is slowly building up. The goal for the new organization, Science Europe, I'm the vice president of that organization, by the way, is to strengthen the European research area. And as a policy document, we have a roadmap which determines the agenda. The organization Science Europe was opened or inaugurated 1 year ago, and it is located here in Brussels. The roles, the aims of Science Europe is to provide a voice for science based in Europe. And it is a voice that tries, first of all, to promote the collective scientific interest of the 50+ member organizations. Science Europe supports the member organizations. They also try to survey the state of science and research in Europe and providing foresight activities and ensuring that we have a maximum input of these activities. As I said, the main goal is actually to support the European research area, and we actively try to collaborate and help other organizations and collaborate with them. We are also very active to try to, I say, reopen the world for science. As you know, science is sort of a global thing. And when I was young, at least, the world was my arena where I played. But due to, I would say, the European policy or politics, we have been a little bit forced to try to solve our internal European problems to be better and more competitive. So we have been Eurocentric, I usually call it. It's time really to open up again and try to collaborate and let all the scientists collaborate freely and help them to collaborate freely globally. I mentioned the strategy document. It contains a number of vision points for the European research area. But all of these vision points cannot be handled by Science Europe. That has to be handled on the political level, maybe by the universities, other actors. But Science Europe has 10 points, which is called the roadmap, 10 action points where we can ourselves make a difference. Today, we have a revision of this roadmap. Of course, one of the central issues in that roadmap is best practice regarding gender issues. That is a very, very important and strategic issue for Science Europe. I hope you have got the first glimpse of what Science Europe is. You will certainly hear more about it in the future, but I will stop there and move over to the presentations for this session. So the first speaker is Professor Simone Buitendijk, Vice Rector of the University of Leiden, member, as I said, of LERU, the League of European Research Universities, and she's in the steering group for the advice paper on gender in academia. I know LERU very well because I'm from the Lund University, professor there, and we are one of these, I think, 20 members of the LERU. 21, I get correction here. The title is Report on Gender Equality Action from the League of European Research Universities. Please.
Many of you present here today have been active in the field of gender equality, probably for a large number of years. And I'm sure many of you will find it difficult to remain driven and energetic. And if we look at the recent figures that have been mentioned by Ms. Quinn, among others, I think you're right to sometimes feel a little disgruntled. Almost 45% of PhD students are women, 33% of scientists in Europe are women, and only 15% of heads of larger higher education institutes in Europe are women. And if we look at all the efforts that have been put into this issue over the last 10, 20 years, at the level of the EU, at the level of individual countries, at the level of funding agencies, at the level of universities, and at the level of projects on the one hand, and then we look at the excruciatingly slow progress that's being made towards gender balance. If we look at those two and the ratio between them, I think we have a lot of reason to sometimes feel tired and weary. But today, I must say, I really want to give you a message of hope, because I'm convinced that we're on the brink of big changes. I'm convinced that if we grab the momentum that is gaining, we can really see a lot more progress over the next 10 years than we have seen over the last 10, 20, 30 years. And the reason I'm so optimistic is twofold. One reason I'm very optimistic is that there is so much evidence now. There's a huge body of research that tells us why there is this problem. And I think we should become more and more aware of that. And I'm sure everybody in this room is becoming more and more aware of it. And people outside this room are becoming aware of it too. And with that awareness comes a narrative that we can use. And the body of research shows us very clearly why there is an issue. And because it's so clear, it also tells us what the tools are to change it. So that makes me feel very optimistic. And the second reason I'm optimistic is that there is a large number of very influential efforts either on the way or actually being implemented. And to skip all the national efforts, because that would be too many to mention this afternoon. I'm just going to mention some of the EU efforts that already have been mentioned by some of the previous speakers. Of course, there's GenSet. GenSet is an EU project that I actually was part of, and the first Gender Summit was the result of GenSet. And of course, this Gender Summit also is a result of GenSet, and it's being organized, as was the GenSet project, by Elizabeth Politzer, who is just up here, and Portia, her organization. And it has certainly helped me to work together with a large number of scientists all over Europe, and with gender experts from Europe and actually from the US. There's a new cost action on gender equality that has just started a few weeks ago. There's ERANET, which was mentioned, I think, in Ms. Quinn's speech on gender equality. There's the Gendered Innovations Project. And there's so many others that are happening at this very moment. And what we need to do is bring all those efforts together and thereby gain enormous momentum. What I want to do today in my short presentation is basically talk about the body of evidence very briefly and tell you what I think the most important conclusions are of all the research that has been done into gender inequality. And I want to tell you about a project that's very near and dear to my heart that should be combined with all these other wonderful EU efforts. And that's the project by LERU. So let me start by telling you about what we know from research. And I believe that at this moment in 2012, we have over 1,500 articles that look into this issue of gender imbalance and gender inequality. And if we want to single out the most important reason why women don't make it into leadership positions in the same percentages as men do, the most important single reason is that as a society, as men and women alike, we have a bias, and very often it's subconscious, and that makes it even harder to do something about it. And that bias is that we find it difficult to accept that women are equally good as science leaders and leaders in general as men are. We on average find women less competent to be good scientists and to be good science leaders. And that's something that we all have, not just men. Women have it too. The whole society has it. And what we need to do is become more and more aware of it in order to be able to combat it and to actually implement the tools to rectify the situation. And to just mention one article of those 1,500 plus, it's an article that recently appeared that caused quite a bit of discussion. It's a very clever design, and it looks at women in a very early stage of their career, at actually pre-graduate level. And that's why I think it's interesting to discuss it with you here. But it's just one out of many. But it shows what all the other articles show too. It's an article that was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, a US journal. And it was a randomized controlled trial that the researchers carried out. And what they did is they randomly allocated letters of application to 127 US scientists from leading top institutions that remain unnamed in the paper because it's a very touchy topic. So these 127 scientists, men and women, randomly get allocated letters of application. And these pre-graduate students are applying for a management position. They want to manage a lab. But these people don't really exist. They're fake applicants. And the only difference between the two groups of letters is the name of the applicant. And you may already guess, one group of letters, the applicant is a man, has a male name, and the other group of applicants, the applicant has a female name. And these are non-existing people, so the CVs are exactly the same, which of course in real life can't happen that easily. The results of this study show that the scientists rating the applications are less likely to hire the women than they're likely to hire the men. When asked whether they would want to mentor this particular applicant, are less likely to mentor the women than they're likely to mentor the men. They want to give women a lower salary than they want to offer the men, $26,000 compared to $30,000 a year. So that's a sizable difference. And when asked why they would not give a person a job, they basically were more likely to say that they find the female applicant incompetent than they find the male applicant incompetent. Now, this is not very shocking. We've seen these results in many studies. But what I found very interesting about this is that the female scientists were just as likely to disfavor the girls as the male scientists were. So what should this tell us, ladies and gentlemen? Because luckily I see a lot of gentlemen in this audience as well today. It should tell us that as a society we just find it difficult, because of our upbringing and whatever else, to see women as competent science leaders. And in order to rectify that, we need very direct tools. We need to implement measures to make sure that all these small molehills, because at every stage of a woman's career she'll encounter these unconscious biases and the people who have to rate her, that all these small molehills don't in the end become this big mountain that we now see. Over 50% of graduates from master's programs in Europe are women, and only 15 make it to the top of higher education institutes. And that's because of all these subconscious biases and the effects of them at every stage of a woman's career. And some of the tools we can identify just from beginning to be aware of this. And this should be part of our narrative when we try to convince leaders to change, because we're wasting female talent if we leave it this way. And the second reason why I'm optimistic, I just told you about, is that there are a lot of efforts underway to actually rectify this situation. And I want to tell you today about LERU, the League of European Research Universities, with 21 research-intensive universities being a member, among which my own university in Leiden in the Netherlands. LERU has just adopted this summer a position paper which is called, and I'll look at it to make sure I'm saying it right, Women, Research and Universities, Excellence Without Gender Bias. And what's wonderful about this paper and about the effort is that all the rectors of the 21 universities have said, we want to change this. We no longer accept the fact that we're wasting female talent. We're seeing what all the research is showing us, and we want to make a difference. And what's interesting about the report, you can find it online if you just Google LERU. You can download it as a PDF. What's really good about this report, I think, is that we don't waste a lot of time talking about the why. We don't spend page after page after page after page on collating all the research. We're basically saying we know what the situation is. This is the narrative. Of course, we reference it because we're scientists. But now we want to move on. And what are we going to do? And LERU has as their motto, they want to lead by example. So we also want to actually implement all the measures that we're advocating. And these measures are in 4 big areas. The first area is leadership, vision and strategy. The second area is structural change. The third area is accountability and monitoring. And the fourth area is gender-sensitive research. And in this first area, what we say as universities is that it's very important, it's pivotal, that the leadership at the top buys into this argument, that they understand the seriousness of the situation and that they, as leadership, tell the whole organization it needs to change. And this is actually a very evidence-based measure. The leadership of a big institution, any organization that wants to change its gender balance, needs to show the organization it's very serious. And to do so, we need gender action plans, so that's a recommendation from this report. We need structures, visible structures, such as an office for gender balance and an office in such a place in the organization that it actually has power and visibility. And we need funds. No policy without money. So universities who want to implement these changes need to allocate funds, and that also tells the organization that it's really serious. And the second thing we're saying is this structural change issue. This is not a project that can last 4 years and that can be adopted because one particular board member likes it and then we can forget about it again. This is something that will take energy, will take continued energy, and it needs to last. Otherwise, we'll never get lasting change. So we have a few measures that we actually advocate that also needs to be lasting. We advocate different tools in different stages of women's careers, and those are geared towards women. But we also find it very important to talk about work-life balance measures in a gender-neutral way, because they're important for men and women alike. They should never become only a women's issue. So universities who want to create better balance in work and life need to do that both for their female and their male employees. And then the third area is the accountability, and I think this is really unique about the LERU position paper and the actions that will follow from it. What we're saying is we know that monitoring and looking at trends and looking at the effect of our policies is pivotal. It's also a very evidence-based measure if you want to make real change. So what we're saying as LERU universities is that we're going to do combined monitoring for ourselves to learn from each other. So we're now actually in the process of developing indicators that we're going to ask from all these universities to send to the head office of LERU every year. And we'll monitor and we'll look at trends and we'll look at the gender action plans and the effectiveness of it combined with what we see in this joint monitoring. And as far as I know, this is the first time in history that a group of prestigious universities are saying we're going to join forces and we're not going to just monitor our own actions in our own universities, but we're going to compare and we're going to learn from each other. And that's how serious we are. And this fourth area is the area of gender-sensitive research. And that's basically what the Gendered Innovation Project is all about, which has been mentioned before here. And that too we find important as universities, that in the content of our research we also become more gender sensitive. So I think this is all really great. And to make it even better is that LERU decided that they want to help our Commissioner for Research and Innovation, Ms. Geoghegan Quinn, and the EU in reaching the goals in ERA, the European Research Area. And Ms. Quinn has decided on 5 big-ticket items, and one of them is gender equality. So LERU as a network has signed an MOU with the Commissioner. She mentioned it in her speech, and there are a number of other stakeholders who have done the same. And we're basically committing ourselves to doing things in these areas. So we're committing ourselves to increasing gender equality in our universities and to being leading. And I want to just read you that one paragraph of the MOU so you know what we're going to do. And at the end of 2013 we actually have to show the Commissioner our first results. So we're really serious about this. So what we've said is, in the area of gender, we'll develop and start or continue to implement a gender strategy, addressing such issues as the commitment from the university's leadership, the right mix of gender-specific career development measures and gender-blind work-life balance measures, the successful implementation of gender measures through transparency, accountability and monitoring, and the promotion and support of gender-sensitive science. So, I can't help myself. I'm actually really hopeful and optimistic and excited about the changes that I think are just around the corner. And the message that I want to leave you with today is that we are no longer isolated and alone, as individual women or as people leading projects. We are not alone because our numbers are growing, and because gender equality is no longer just a women's issue. And in academia, as in many other fields, there is a growing awareness that if we're wasting female talent, we're not just shortchanging the women that we're ignoring, but we're also shortchanging science, and thereby we're shortchanging society. Change is upon us. Let's join forces and make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a most interesting presentation, I must say. Before I leave it open to the floor to ask questions to the speaker or make comments, I would like to ask you one thing. I was very impressed by this sort of very active thing you're doing. You're not just talking. That's very positive. But you started to say that a lot of the problems has to do with the unconscious bias. And the unconscious bias is, as far as I understand, nothing particular for science or the academia. That's something that is there in the society. So, I mean, either we accept that and we well, probably not, but we have to work against sort of the force all the time within science and academia, or have you foreseen some way to change the whole situation? Because this is serious, of course.
Yeah, I think it's hard to magically change our bias and make it go away, because it's ingrained and it's something that we probably pick up really early in our lives. But I think what's key here is the awareness of it. If we just accept that we are biased, then that's really difficult, because it basically means that we're an unjust society. It means that as leaders we've probably done things that actually make this bias remain. We have shortchanged certain groups of people, and that's not an easy recognition. But if we recognize that, and if we don't blame, if we say we all have it, men and women alike, then I think some of the tools will become really apparent. Because one of the ways to counterbalance that is to have hard targets, to say we need to have actual measurements. We need to promote more women on a relative basis than we promote men. Because as soon as we reach the gender balance, we have more than 40% women in particular bodies, then it will become clear that they're just as good in leadership roles as men are. But if we keep having the situation where maybe there's 1 or 2 women in a group of 10, it's very difficult for them to exhibit their leadership, to feel recognized, to do well, to show their talents. So what we can do to counterbalance our bias, I think, is have very clear measures and implement them and carry them out, and explain to everybody that we were doing it because of this bias.
Thank you very much. I leave it open for questions from the audience. So I guess you have to raise your hand, and then I point at the person. Okay, the first one was a woman in the middle there. I think it is, yes.
Thank you for your nice presentation. I do have a question. Seeing that we're now in an economic crisis and all the budgets for a lot of the countries for science are decreasing, and even for Horizon 2020 there are rumors that the budget would go down. And you are saying that if we want to do something on the gender equality, funds will be needed. So I'm wondering, are you not a bit pessimistic that the crisis might have a negative effect on the gender balance at universities that do not have specific action plans?
I understand your question, and I am a bit worried. I'm not pessimistic, because I think if we use the right narrative, if we explain why this is an investment and it's not something that we just do to be nice to women, and yeah, it will cost some money, and then we don't do it when we don't have the money. In order to actually be financially savvy, we're stupid to waste women's talents. So we need some budget for the policies, but the payoff will be many, many, many times the investment we put in, because it's really costly to not use all the women's talents. So if we're worried about the financial situation, we should actually be working harder at drawing women in, and instead of just leaving them after being highly educated and not letting them play part in our universities and in society. So it's a matter, I think, of framing the message, and if we do it well, I think we should be more inclined to do something about this because of the financial crisis.
The second one is from the gentleman sitting in the middle.
Yes. This is Roy. I am from University of Bergen, Norway. And I'm staying in Europe over the last 1.5 years, and I visited a lot of educational institutions, and I see in most of the cases European girls are not adopting the education of engineering science, especially their presence in engineering science like electrical engineering, computer science, and even the industrial engineering is quite low in comparison to North America or other belts. So do you have any initiatives to your projects to motivate the girls to adopt the engineering science?
Actually, there are universities who are zooming in on engineering and on the hard sciences. And I think there's nothing wrong with doing that, because it's important to also get more girls into those fields. And we need role models for other generations of girls. But I think as a university leader, I find it important to work with all faculties on these issues because of the bias being so universal in my university. Because even in the Faculty of Humanities, for instance, where maybe 60% of graduates are women, at my university we still have only 18–19% female professors there. So the issues are very similar. So yeah, maybe we should put a bit more effort into the sciences as academic leaders. But I think the basic issues are very much the same. So if we change our universities and make them better workplaces for female students, I'm sure that will also result in improvements in the number of female leaders in the hard sciences.
One more question to the lady in the middle there.
Thank you. Just wondering if in the action plan we can include some coaching training during the during the PhD years for a woman, try to make them learn to take power. It's aggressive things, but for example, stop saying, yes, I will do that for the department, no problem, I will do extra hours, without negotiating something in compensation. Because most of the time is due to education and so on. We have the sociology and many articles on that, saying that the women take the collective side on their own, but they forgot to negotiate something in compensation. So just to train the young researchers saying, you do that, but you ask this in a compensation, like a computer or position. But it can be targeted, and it's costly, but not so costly, and it changes mentality. Just wondering.
Thank you for that question. I think it's actually a really important one, because what you're proposing is to make women more savvy and make them negotiate better. And I think that is one way of doing it. And I certainly am not against mentoring programs training women to do that. But as a university leader, I actually would like to do better than that. And what I would like to say to deans and leaders of research groups is, if you rightfully want to have more women in your selection committees or in other places, make sure that if they're being disadvantaged because you draw on their time more than you do on their male colleagues' time, give them support, give them an extra sum of money, or give them fewer teaching hours. And I think that's really important. So apart from the message to the young women themselves, the leaders need to understand that they shouldn't ask more from them in jobs that aren't so visible than they do from men.